The Dark Room, exploring the strange and controversial, with your hosts, Paul Salvatori and Jordan Randall. Today we're talking with Stefoknee Wolscht.
Okay, so I guess the first thing that we should bring up for our listeners who aren't getting the visual here is that what you're wearing, it's, I guess, what most people wouldn't consider normal, I guess, quote unquote. But of course,
well, except I'm a 6'2", 270-pound mechanic, so this is very normal for mechanics to wear. It's a pink and white gingham dress with poofy sleeves and a Peter Pan collar and little pink ribbons all over it. So yeah, that's pretty much what you imagine when you hear from
standard,
mechanic,
right? Yeah,
So,
comes with the territory.
yeah. No, it's very unique. It's just a little. I call it my Daisy Duke dress, and because of the gingham, and it's short. I have to cover my panties, so very discreet. And then I got this little fake jewelry and nice little pink bracelets to match.
Excellent. So, Stefoknee, I want to ask you, because when I first heard about your story, the news stories were saying that you've chosen to identify as a 6-year-old girl, but I want to ask you whether you find that to be an accurate description of who you are.
Yeah, actually, I don't identify as a 6-year-old girl. I identify as a 52-year-old trans queer, like genderqueer person. So I fluctuate between Paul and Stefoknee, but Paul wears dresses too. So I use female pronouns, but I do use the 6-year-old girl persona to help cope with anxiety. So when I can't handle it, I sort of digress to this little girl world where I play with dolls and I have my, coloring books and stuff, and I just escape the reality that sometimes is too stressful.
So primarily you identify as a trans woman, not a 6-year-old girl?
Yes.
Would that be the best way to put it? Yeah.
So I'm wearing this dress today because this is my debut of going to comedy stand-up improv, and so I'm dressing the part. I want to actually do my comedy routine as a 6-year-old girl, so that persona will hopefully have a life. We'll see how I do in front of a microphone, but I'm hoping that that is something that hasn't been tried before and that I can pull it off. So
Okay. So arguably there's different ways of being a child, a 6-year-old girl. So I'm curious to know, where did you get your own conception of what a 6-year-old girl is and behave according to that?
Well, I think I've always been a girly girl. And so years ago, I asked my friends, I know I'm not a teenager, but in teenage years, how old would you say I was? And they said, in teenage years? And it was almost unanimous. All my friends said 8 years old, 8 years old, 8 years old. And so for a long time, I was this 8-year-old girl. And then a friend of mine, her granddaughter, wanted to have a little sister, so she was going to become 9. And I said, no, you don't have to become 9. She was 7 at the time. I said, why don't I just become 6 years old, and then you have a little sister, a very massive little sister. But and that's how that happened. And then my girlfriend uses hypnotherapy, and she liked working with the 6-year-old Stefoknee as far as dealing with issues that needed to be resolved. And I've even heard it from neighbors and friends that they see a huge difference now that I'm accepting and working with that little girl, because it does go back to my early memories of wanting to be a girl in grade 1, and there's a lot of little things that 6-year-olds do that I was never allowed to do as a boy, and so now I'm doing them.
So I guess, that's perfect segue to this question. What I want to ask is, why specifically a 6-year-old girl versus, say, I don't know, a 20-year-old woman or a 13-year-old or teenage girl? Why a 6-year-old girl?
I was born in 1963, so Stonewall happened in 1969, and I have these clear images on a black and white TV of men dressed as women, and that was the first time that I realized there was something there. I remember picture day in school and watching the girls get nice, pretty dresses. Now it was the 70s, so it was like, or 69, early 70s, so they were polyester dresses. But to me, they were really pretty. And I would often just see the girls with their new dresses and thinking, oh, I wish I had a new dress and this and that. And so now going back and getting dresses, especially like now I can have any dress I want made, I choose those styles because it's something that makes me feel equal to other people, even though I'm much older. But I'm going back to that time, and I guess my girlfriend says I'm filling that fuel tank of needing to wear those dresses and present in public. And even prior to coming here, I went for lunch, and it gets a lot of stares looking like this. But you know what? I love looking like this, and it's very empowering to be able to express myself.
So generally, how the reactions? How have they been in public?
Pretty good. Pretty good for the most part. The negative reactions come from anonymous people on the internet that don't want to face me. I would say in the last, since 2010, I might have had half a dozen assaults in that time. Usually frivolous people I don't know, they just randomly decide to attack me. They haven't gone well for them. I was able to each time defend myself.
So you're talking about physical assaults.
Yeah. Ironically, once 3 women came to my aid. I was getting on a streetcar, and I didn't even notice. I knew this guy didn't want me on the streetcar, but 3 girls stepped up and basically got the streetcar driver to kick him off the streetcar because he was harassing me. But I didn't see him as a threat. He was threatening me, but he was much smaller, and he was just angry. He had issues. I don't know what they were, but before I knew it, these 3 people stepped forward, all young women, all university-age students, and they stepped forward and basically told the driver to ask this rider to leave. And then I sat down and we talked, and it was great. I paid my $3, so I was hoping to get a ride. I didn't know he was allowed to kick. He wanted to kick me off, but I thought, no, I need to get somewhere. I got an appointment to get to. So. But sometimes they're pretty nasty assaults, and I don't understand why, if I'm minding my own business and someone just randomly comes up to me, doing just about anything you can imagine. One time I even had a guy throwing rocks at me. And it was very biblical. I'm I'm protecting my head, and there's these rocks being lobbed at me, and I'm thinking, this is really biblical. And I'm thinking, this probably doesn't happen to a lot of people in Toronto, right? So I did get close enough, though, and I gave him a left to the throat that got him quiet really fast. He didn't actually connect with any of the rocks, and he did lob about 3 more as I crossed the street. But nothing connected. So I was then actually worried about the cars going by because this guy's throwing rocks at me and might hit a car.
Right. I mean, just because you're seeing this firsthand, any insight into why this mistreatment occurs?
I think it's guys that are probably wearing pink panties. Because usually guys that don't have gender or sexuality issues, they don't have a problem with how I identify. In fact, a lot of them are very comfortable sitting around talking with me. I just met an elderly gentleman who was retired up in Bridge north of Peterborough. And, he walked into Tim Hortons and we started chatting. And here's a guy who's like a man's man. He had just taken his 4-wheeler out to plow snow, and he came in his pickup truck, and he's, in this little rural town. And we started chatting, and I'm in a little pretty dress, right? And at first he's looking at me, and we got chatting, and in the end he was like really nice to me. And then last weekend, so this is like 2 weeks ago or 3 weeks ago, last weekend I see him or I don't even see him at the farmer's market. He sees me, and then he basically pipes up, "Hey, man-child, how you doing? Give me a high five." And here's this guy from the coffee shop. Wow. And totally comfortable with it, obviously comfortable with his sexuality, that he can be in this busy farmer's market. Like, there's hundreds and hundreds of people, and here we are chatting, and I didn't want to offend him, but how many people are going to call you over to chat with you? But I find most people are like that. The exceptions and the ones that have issues with me, for the most part, I believe they have issues with their own sexual identity, and maybe they're in the closet, or maybe there's something, they don't know how to react, and so they overreact, and in doing so they try to prove themselves. Unfortunately, if you do decide to provoke violence and they come at me, it's pretty embarrassing when a guy in a dress takes you down, right? Like, they got a lot more to lose. Like, so you beat up this sissy in a dress, right? Who do you tell? So you beat up a guy in a dress. Meanwhile, if you get your clock cleaned by a guy in a dress, that's pretty humiliating, right? So.
I know that you were married?
Yes, 23 years.
I was wondering, when you decided to marry, at the time, did you think that by doing so you would eliminate the self of you that is transgender, or how did you think things would pan out, if at all?
My wife had already known for a couple of years that I was trans. In fact, we were buying clothes together. We were dating with me as a girl in Toronto.
Okay.
But I'm not sure. Maybe she was trying to change me or whatever, but after 23 years, she obviously didn't change me. And she just grew tired of it and basically asked me in 2009, stop being trans or leave. And I left. Unfortunately, I left thinking she needed a little bit of a break from it. I didn't know that our entire family would fall apart and everything would be lost because of it. She was very vindictive and very angry. Still is to this day. And she won't give interviews to anybody. I hope one day my kids come around. I don't think she ever will because she's kind of in denial too. Before we married, she had a boyfriend and she had me. And she had chosen the boyfriend actually. And I went off and she was with John. And then a week later, she was in the hospital getting her stomach pumped. And I went and saw her. And she said, well, I wanted you to be jealous of me. And so then we ended up getting pregnant and then getting married in December. In June, my daughter was born. So I thought she was attracted to me as a more effeminate man. And I still don't know. I wish she would interview with somebody so I could find out what her side of the story is. Because she hasn't told anybody the same story. I've heard little bits of story from, people that I used to know. But for the most part, when people hear my story, they say, okay, now this makes sense. Because what she's saying doesn't make sense. So, well, she told some people I'm becoming a priest, and she told somebody else I left for another man, and then she told somebody else I left for another woman, which is close, except I was the other woman. And, I just said to them, why don't you guys talk to each other? Because you'll see nothing makes sense. Right. Yet this is the reason she asked me to leave, was because of the dresses and... and she put that in the separation agreement as well. That's what led to my homelessness. She wasn't prepared to sign a separation agreement that didn't include my not wearing women's clothes or appearing in public as a woman. And when I refused to sign that, that's when things went south, and everybody came after me, including our local priest and the police up there in our community. They felt that this was too much of an embarrassment for her and the kids, and that I needed to be kept under. And that's still happening. I'm actually on bail right now, and I have another trial scheduled for July 18th. They get a restraining, as soon as they have charges, they have a restraining order. And with no evidence, it's very hard to get legal aid, because they look at it and say, there's nothing here, Meanwhile, they do go to trial, they do convict me without a lawyer, and I end up with a criminal record because of their, phobia or the stigma attached to being trans, right? So it's kind of a complicated story.
So for a while, it was accepted, this part of you, by your wife.
Oh yeah, for a long time. We were married 23 years.
So when do you think it began to change?
I think it started in 2007. I went to this program called Gender Journeys, and the doctors there had suggested I tell all my children. Prior to that, I had told my oldest two daughters, and my wife then asked me not to tell the other kids. But the doctors at Sherburne Health said that I should tell all the kids, because that way they can form their own opinion about the stigma attached to transgender people, because of what they hear in the playground, and knowing that their father's transgender, then they could say, okay, well, what you're saying isn't true, because my dad wears dresses and he's not like what you're suggesting, so that was their motive. Unfortunately, once I did that, there was a change in my wife's attitude. She wanted me to start finishing things around the house, getting stuff ready as if I was leaving. And I said, this isn't important. She even I had bought the land prior to us getting married, and I built the house, so her name was never on the deed. And she said, let's go to the lawyer and get my name on the deed and stuff like that. And I didn't put two and two. I was so naive. I thought, this makes no difference. We've been married 21 years. There's no need for this. Obviously, this is your house. It's my house. It's our home, right? But once she asked me to leave, then she had full control of everything. I basically ended up with 2 bags of clothes and a laptop and a cell phone, and, stuck in Toronto, isolated from my kids. And to her, that was fair. To the courts, that was fair. To the police, that was fair. To the priest, that was fair. To me, I didn't understand it. I lost everything. especially when you lose your family. That's the biggest thing. And that's what led to the depression and the anxiety. Is it's almost like the bottom had fallen out, and I was white middle class, and I didn't understand what homelessness was. I didn't understand what mental health was. I didn't understand depression and suicide. And I very quickly found myself in a homeless shelter dealing with those thoughts of suicide and not knowing how to cope. And years of trying every medication to, not think those thoughts didn't work. But yet this play therapy does work. And I've found from other people that they say the same thing. Once you deal with something so traumatic, it's actually nice to escape back to your childhood when things were simpler. And for me, not only my childhood, but the childhood that I wished I would have had as a girl. And then things are simpler, and you're empowered. A lot of homeless people, a lot of people with mental health issues, people working within the system, the first thing you lose is your power. You have no voice. People tell you when you're going to eat. People tell you, you're going to go to this appointment, that appointment, and you have to do as you're told. There's no respect for people that are marginalized. So that's a long answer.
Yes,
The next answer, I'll just answer yes or no.
Oh,
okay?
no. Thank you so much for that. Yeah, go ahead, George.
Yeah, so I mean, that's horrible to hear. I mean, that's such a horrible thing, especially when it's your family, because it's so close. But you mentioned now you have a girlfriend.
Yes.
Yeah. So in terms of like family outside of your own kids and whatnot, like how does the rest of your family, like parents or siblings, how do they view what's going on with you in your life?
Everybody. Basically, once our marriage fell apart, I lost everybody. My dad passed away a few years ago. I wasn't told that he was dying. I wasn't invited to his funeral. I was cut out of his will. My siblings didn't feel the need to talk to me. When I was originally in Toronto in the hospital, my dad and my ex-wife came and took my car away. There are a lot of things that happened that you would think family would protect you, especially if you're going through a divorce, right, or through separation. You would think at least your side of the family would at least ask you what's going on. They chose to just push me out of the family in order to protect their own. And like, it's kind of hard having a brother that's trans, and so it's easier to forget I exist than to pretend that that's something you need to deal with, because they have their own kids and life, and I don't know. I thought we were a pretty close family, and if I think back to a month or even weeks prior to me leaving, even the week I left, I still was visiting my brothers and stuff. It was kind of surreal to be so marginalized and isolated from everybody. People not taking your calls after a while, and that goes for cousins, aunts, and uncles, every relative, and it's like having leprosy. It's like being the town leper. You are pushed to the outskirts of town and forgotten about. Nobody comes wondering, and that's basically what it was like for me. Nobody wanted to be. My best friend didn't want to be anywhere near me, and he was a Metro police officer, so he's seen this a lot. Yet, he chose to just dissolve our friendship, and I had a lot of friends that did that. Nobody came for years. Nobody would check into how I was doing. I was active in the church and active in the Knights of Columbus. The only correspondence I got from the Knights was to pay my dues, and I was living in a homeless shelter. Thinking, you guys are raising money for people that are marginalized, and here you are. I have a bag with hundreds of letters that I just stopped opening. They kept wanting me to pay my dues month after month after month, and I'm in a homeless shelter. It was the absurdity of it all. I saved all those letters just because, I'm going to be doing comedy. I want to carry them onto stage and, basically drop them on the floor. It's probably 10 pounds of letters, right?
Wow.
The postage is more than what my dues was. So, yeah, it got to the absurd. But, yeah, I lost every family member. My mom and my mother-in-law had both died prior to this, and I think that's kind of a blessing that they weren't there to see how our family fell apart, because had they been around, I wonder if it would have affected their marriages, because I don't think they would have allowed this to happen. And yet they would have been betting on the wrong horse, because I think my father and my father-in-law are both very clear. Well, my dad's dead now. He died, and he took it to his grave. Where my mom, she had warned me, don't tell Dad about this, and that was something that I was afraid to do. My siblings told me not to tell Dad either, but he just happened to call me one day when I was in a dress and I was nearby, and he needed me to look at his tractor. I thought, well, I'm not driving back to Toronto to get changed. So I went over and I basically started working on his tractor, and he didn't say nothing about me being in a dress. And then I said, like, you see I'm wearing a dress, right? He goes, yeah, what is that? I said, well, I'm transgender. I'm a guy who thinks he's a girl. And his response was, oh, like on Oprah? I said, yeah, like on Oprah. And that was it. He never had any other comments. But it was still too much for him to reconcile, and so it ended up being the end of our relationship, or my relationship with my dad.
Why do you think that he felt so strongly? Was it from a religious background, or that?
Well, and plus, like, he died at 81, right? So he grew up, men don't wear dresses,
Right, right.
and Jerry Spring, all those,
Yeah, if they do,
freak
they're on
shows.
those. Yeah, those
Yeah,
shows.
so I think with younger people, it's easier. I find people under 30, I do speak at universities and various community groups and different organizations. And if people are under 30, they're pretty accepting. Under 15, it's so easy. Like the young people today, they're almost genderless. They don't care. Boys can be girls and girls can be boys. But once you go over 35, you start to see some resistance. Once you get over 50 and 60, you're getting into where there's a lot of disgust. I was in a mall this morning. It was mostly senior citizens in there doing their morning exercise type thing. And out of everybody that was there was one woman who talked to me briefly for a little bit. And then when her friend showed up, it was almost like, you need to leave. You can't be here. My friend can't see you talking to me. And she was a retired woman. She was very friendly. She was actually quite nice. But as long as it was one-on-one, it was fine. As soon as her friend showed up, she had this look of like, why are you talking to me? I thought, well, we've been talking for 20 minutes. Like, really? So, weird.
It's like people are not really afraid to talk to you, but they're afraid of what other people will think.
It's like the
Yes.
perception.
Yeah.
So you are transgender.
Yes.
So do you have plans to do anything like surgical or anything like that to?
Well, I have a broken little finger that I'm going to try and have fixed. But no, that's a little personal. And I'm okay with you asking it as long as you're okay with me not answering it.
Absolutely.
I don't know. It's very complicated. The surgery is very, very dangerous. So have I started the process? Yes, I started that 6 months after my wife asked me to leave. Have I stopped the process? Yes. I'm weighing the costs, not financial costs, the physical costs. And I don't know if I'm prepared to risk, my health for that, because I'm, 52 years old. Like I said I have a girlfriend. I also have a boyfriend. They're fine with the way I am. In fact, most of the people I know love the fact that I present like this and I sound like this. I have a voice that doesn't fit what people see. So I'm kind of embracing genderqueer because I think it's empowering to young people to see me present as Paul in my dresses and own it. And up in Peterborough, I do ask people, I introduce myself as Paul. And the neighbors up there and everything, they see me cutting the grass or raking leaves or taking the garbage out in dresses like this. And like even this morning, like it was icy and the school was canceled up there. And the neighbor was going to drive her granddaughter to school. And I'm walking out of the house like this. She goes, hey, Paul, have you been out on the roads yet? I said, no, just going now. She says, the buses are canceled. I said, but I saw the Salter go by. So here we're having this conversation. And she's standing there with her granddaughter. We're talking about the safety of the roads. And the wind is blowing my dress up. And I'm pulling my dress down. And I'm thinking, oh, But it's up there, quite honestly, it's amazing. People say, oh, you can't go to Peterborough looking like this. But you can. The first time I went up there was by Go Bus and Go Train. So I took the train out to Oshawa and I got on the Go Bus, and it's a double-decker bus. Well, I got to the top half and it was hunting season. So there's all these guys in camouflage and I'm climbing up the stairs in my pink dress. And I just looked at them and I go, uh-oh, I got the wrong memo. Because they're all army ready to go to battle. And we joked around and we talked, and there's lots of university students up there and people with questions. And a couple of times I've even met trans people that wanted to go to the city, and start transitioning. And because I look like this, it opens the door to dialogue. So they sit very close to me, and I'm looking at them and I'm thinking, they're kind of gender neutral, start up a conversation with them. And sure enough, they want to know what the next steps are. And so it's an opportunity to educate and to make someone feel safe. And that's what I do. So I'm big, so.
So I know you have an adoptive family, correct, Paul?
Yes.
I'm sorry, Stephanie.
Either
We're
one.
just talking Paul right now. Sorry,
Yeah, either one is
sorry,
fine.
Stephanie. So I just want to ask if you're happier now with your adoptive family, and maybe what a day in the life is like for you with the family.
It's actually very interesting. I have an apartment in Toronto, so whether they're down there or I'm by myself, in my apartment, I am able to be me, Paul or Stephanie. Most people in Toronto know me as Stephanie. But when I head up north, I have a bedroom up there, which is your typical little girl's room with Pippi Longstocking and strawberry shortcake and My Little Pony painted on the wall. And I've got all the little girl stuff in there, my tutus and, everything's pink and rainbows and stuff. And up in Peterborough, I actually have a bedtime, and I am expected to try to embrace the little in me as much as possible. In fact, there will be, we have meetings between the three of us, and sometimes they'll say, for the next week, we want you just to be little. So you can color, you can watch cartoons, you can do whatever you want to do, but we don't want you taking the garbage out. We don't want you cutting the grass. Just forget you're big. And those are times when they know either a court date is coming up or Christmas or one of my kids' birthdays or whatever, and they sort of brace me from that reaction that triggers the anxiety. And once the anxiety starts, it's hard to turn it off. It's the adrenaline underneath your skin, your body. You are reactive. You're like being hunted. And then at night when you go to lay your head on the pillow, your heartbeat is racing like a rabbit's, and you can hear it in your ears, and you're not falling asleep. And if you don't sleep for a day or two or three, then you're almost ready for the hospital, because that's when suicide thoughts kick in. So they tried to prevent that by getting me into little girl mode. And then quite often I don't look at the calendar and I don't consider what's happening, chronologically, whether it's Christmas or birthday or whatever. And I get lost doing a puzzle inside of the puzzle. Like as you're sorting pieces and building the puzzle, you lose track of reality. Cartoons are amazing for that. You lose track of reality. And in my room, I have my dolls and my teddy bears, and we have playtime, and days sort of run into each other. And when I'm exhausted, I fall asleep because there's no adrenaline running. And so I am able to sleep. And I don't think about sleeping. I just know I'm tired and it's time to take a nap or go to bed. And it works. It's really, really a good solution. And I've used it with people over the internet. When somebody shares with me that they can't handle it anymore and they're suicidal, I quite often will ask them, do you have a teddy bear or doll you can get, and can you make a fort out of a blanket and use the fort to protect you, use that blanket as a shield from the world? And then the next morning they wake up and they're better. And in fact, right now I'm working with somebody in San Francisco, and they've been homeless since they're 14, and they're in their 30s now, and abandoned by their family at 14. And we have this, I'm the big sister, they're the little sister. I'm 6 and they're 3. And they just love the fact that I will phone them and tell them all the things that they did that day. We talk about their day, and then we talk about what they want to dream about, like, that life is going to be good and tomorrow's going to be even better than today, and today was awesome. And they share with me that they wish they could have had this, 20 years ago.
Wow. So it sounds you're making some connections as the 6-year-old girl, because as you speak, I kind of think it sounds also like a lonely universe. You're playing a lot by yourself.
No, actually, it's getting less and less. You would think that there's not a lot of people doing it. As soon as you speak about it, I've had a lot of people, the minute I mention it in public to a group of people, I found other people, once they realize it's safe to talk about, then they confess that they use it as well. Or a form of it, where they will grab their doll or they will grab their coloring book. And now they actually make adult coloring books. And I just had a European media company here filming, and they said in Europe it's very common for employers to send teams of their employees away for the weekend, for a camping weekend, where they do things that they did as children, and it helps them bond and deal with stress and regroup type thing and work better together. And apparently this is very common in Europe. So I think there's more of it. The fact that I talk about it, and I've had such a negative reaction on the internet since the beginning of December, I think that's opened the door to a lot of people confiding in me and allowing me to sort of take a census. And there's a lot of it going on. And I think if you listen to some of the interviews, even I had done an interview a year before in January, like over a year, 2 years now? Yeah, I don't know, a year ago or 2 years ago. And the two girls that came up, they were in their 20s, in their late 20s. And as we were interviewing, they didn't understand this play therapy and age play. But by the second day, they asked if they could have one of my teddy bears to hold and one of my dolls to hold. And it turned into this play therapy in the middle of the interview. They embraced their child inside. And the whole dynamic of the interview changed. We became more playful, and then you listen to the interview and you realize there was nothing that we couldn't talk about or any subject that we couldn't address. And we had snowball fights and we did all these little kid things, but we're still adults, but we're doing it from a kid's point of view, which means, putting a tutu on and continuing the interview with all three of us wearing tutus, and or playing with dolls. And yet we can still, like, I drive my snowplow, not dressed in this dress, but very similar dresses. And people say, well, how can you be 6 years old and driving a big tractor? It's more fun for a 6-year-old to drive a big tractor, believe it or not. You don't have to make the motor sounds. It does it on its own, right? So.
Like, ideally, how would you like people to respond to you who've never met you and they're seeing you for the first time?
Ask me questions. Talk to me. If you have an idea of who I am or what I'm about, verbalize it, and then let me explain. Maybe you're right, maybe you're wrong. But I think as we talk, everyone who talks to me, everyone who gets to know me is fine with it. It's the people who don't take the time to understand. They're the ones who become defensive for whatever reason. And I'm not going to judge. I just think the overreaction sometimes is a response to not knowing how to react. And they're trying to hide something. So for all you people out there that want to send me more hate mail, be warned, you're outing yourself.
For a lesson, an educationalist. So I know that I learned only yesterday, actually, Stefoknee, that you went missing in December for 4 days, was it?
Yes.
What was the news like when it first hit you? Did you not know you were announced as missing by the police?
Right. What had happened was it had already gone viral on YouTube, the interview, that 4-minute interview with Extra. And I was getting a lot of death threats. And because I didn't know where these people were from, I didn't know if I could go out my front door. I didn't know if I could go to the grocery store. And they were so random, like all the different reasons they had for killing me, that at a certain point I called Extra and said, you guys need to do something. And I called the police and I said, I need help here. And I called the hospital, and the police wouldn't do anything. Extra ended up closing off the comment section, but I think it was already over 900 negative, like really bad comments. And I couldn't get into the hospital. So what I did was I took off out of Toronto. I got in my car. I went up to Peterborough, put the car in the garage. My girlfriend and boyfriend were in Florida, so the house was empty. I went into the house, went to the basement, and fell asleep. And my phone, the house phone, rang at 1 a.m, and it was a friend of mine from Toronto saying, you're all over the news, you're missing. And I said, no. I went to the police and said, I'm getting death threats. I don't feel safe being at my apartment. So at 1 a.m, I went to Peterborough Police Station and I got them to turn on the TV, and I showed them the death threats on YouTube. And at which point they started then they called Toronto and said, don't worry, she's up here. And they had a crisis worker they were going to send to my house. So I gave them my address. And the next morning, the crisis worker didn't come, and it took so this is 1 a.m, it took till I think 11 a.m. the next day for them to take down the missing person thing, even though they knew at 1 a.m. that I was in Peterborough, and they knew the reason why I'd gone into hiding. But I wasn't watching TV, so I didn't realize that I was still a missing person. So things kept escalating and escalating. And then at a certain point, I went back to Peterborough Police because I had heard that they'd given my address out on the news. So my image was there, my name was there on TV, and now my address was on TV. And so I didn't feel safe in Peterborough anymore. So I went back to the police and I said, you guys are the only ones I told this to, and I was expecting a crisis worker to come who never came. So what do I do now? And they said, well, go to the crisis unit at Peterborough Hospital. I went there and I wasn't admitted. So now I'm middle of the night. I'm out on the street thinking, just pull your battery out of your phone and go sleep somewhere in your car. So I drove off north of Lindsay and just went to sleep. And then at a certain point I thought, nobody knows where I am now. Like, if they're looking for me, they've given up looking for me. I took off to Toronto. I did call a friend and I said, listen, I'm going to put my car in front of my apartment. I want you to pick me up and take me to another friend's house so nobody knows where I am. And when I got to my apartment, it had already been ransacked by the police had gone through the whole apartment looking for some kind of idea where I was. And so I basically, turned off the lights and locked up the apartment and left. And then the friend I went to is really computer savvy, and they got onto the dark web, and somebody in Arizona said, like, it's going global now. It's gone really ballistic. You need to get to the police or to a hospital. And again, the police wouldn't do anything. And I called the media. I called 2 television stations to see if they would at least come pick me up, and you can interview me, whatever, just get me somewhere safe where I can hide. And they wouldn't do that. So I called a friend who worked at St. Mike's Hospital, and she said, get to Emerge. If you can get to Emerge, I'll meet you in Emerge and we'll get you in. And so now I hadn't slept very much for 3 or 4 days. And so I was wired really badly. And I got to the hospital. She got me admitted. They sedated me. So this is now like 11 o'clock at night. And I fell asleep till about noon. And then they discharged me at noon. And I thought, I'm right back to being hunted again. So at that point, I sent a message out. If you're going to kill me, meet me in Allen Gardens at 1 o'clock. I'll be by the statue. I'm not running anymore. I don't care. If this is serious, then just do it, whatever you want. So I ended up in Allen Gardens at 1 o'clock. And then some people from my church were there, from my church down in Toronto. And they said, Steph, you can't stay here. I said, you know what? I'm not fighting this anymore. If they want to come by and, take a shot at me or whatever, it's got to stop. I can't live like this. At that point, I had lost 15 pounds from the adrenaline was just running 24/7. And nobody showed up. And then I realized these are all cowards. They just talk, right? And so then I was mad. And I went on the internet and I literally started addressing them one at a time. Like, you're so tough because you don't have a face on here and you don't have a name on here and you know who I am. I said, you know what? I don't care. And, the people said, well, when I see you on the street, you can try and run, but, I'll catch you. So I am not running. I said, I see you on the street. You got 2 free shots. You take a couple shots at me. And after that, I'm going to have and I pity the person that's that first person, because I was mad. I was tired of being hunted. I'd gone to the police. I'd done everything they've asked me to do and it didn't work. And so at that point I thought I'm going to take charge of my life again. And and you feel like you're a rabbit, like there's all these dogs hunting you and you don't know, you're afraid to pop your head out of a hole because they're going to come at you. But I'll tell you, when you turn it around and say, okay, I'll be in the village tomorrow most of the day, I'll be wearing a pink dress, look for me, I don't know what you look like, but just come up to me and smack me in the head or whatever, and we'll deal with it, we'll see how tough you are, and nobody shows up, just talk. And the nicest thing I heard a couple of weeks ago, Rick Mercer did his rant about these trolls, and he was absolutely right. These faceless, nameless cowards that yak, and they're from somewhere in the world, but you don't know. They could be at the end of your street. And at the end of the day, they don't have the guts to put their name out there or their face out there. Not only do I put my name and face, I'm in a little dress. Like, come on. Honestly, not a lot of math here. But, if that's the way they want to live, they're pathetic, And then what I do is I take their picture, like if I find a picture of them, I take it and I make some homophobic comments on their picture. And we'll see, I'll label them as a faggot or a sissy or a girly girl or girly boy and put it out there on the internet. There, that's your face now with what I'm living with. Let's see how tough. And you know how fast they back off? They're gone. They stop bugging me because they know I have the power to out them.
Right.
They can't out me. I've already been outed myself, right? So it's very interesting, the power dynamics. And some of these aren't very old. They're like young kids, and other ones are very, very respected people in the community, like CEOs of companies, and yet they go out of their way to threaten me. Like it makes, like, you have way too much to lose. You know, I don't know why you spend your time doing your job and worry about your public profile. There's somebody from Ottawa that I literally said, you better get your PR people ready, because I'm going to lash back. If you can dish it out, let's see how good you can take it. And I test them, and they run, and they know who they are. Barn Dancer 61.
I know people just their worst sides show up online, and it's no more forgivable. But I find, that's a whole other can of worms. There's a great book by Paul Todd, actually, on what you're talking about, called Extreme Mean, and how this has just become so pervasive and has led people to suicide. It's I think one of the biggest issues for us to grapple with right now in our day. So,
well, the pressure, like when I became missing, like I wanted to die. Like not only had I been ridiculed and threatened and everything like that, but because of Gender Trender and Gallus Mag, I was now labeled a pedophile. And I thought, really? Like, I've never hurt a child in my life. And it got so bad that even Children's Aid in Toronto was contacted. But I already had the police investigating. I got Twitter's head of security involved. And I had the shelter people that knew me. But somebody had said that I had children living in my apartment. And so when Toronto Children's Aid called, I said to them, well, then child abuse isn't the problem, it's the neglect. I haven't fed them in 6 years. If they're here, I haven't seen them. They're probably dead by now. It's kind of ironic. Everyone who knows me knows there's no kids in my apartment, but Children's Aid was given enough information from Americans, it came up from Washington, and telling them that I was a pedophile and that there were young children living in my apartment. And so the head of the shelter, who I pay my rent to, I'm in supportive housing, a deacon from my church, and this police detective, I gave them those 3 numbers. I said, they should know. Like, if you don't believe me, phone them. And so they did contact them, and then they closed the file. But they realized that these trolls will not stop. Like, imagine the waste of taxpayers' money now. Like, the 51 Division in Toronto are investigating, like, hate crimes and cyberbullying and death threats. The head of security for Twitter is involved. There's a lot of resources being spent. But the good news is I make a really good lightning rod for this. So if they're looking for trolls, just tell me to tweet something. They'll come out really quick, And the people that are doing it, the threats, you'd like to think that they're really simple people that can't put a sentence. And a lot of them are. They can't write a sentence, but there's people there that are CEOs of companies. So it's not just ignorant people doing this. There are people who are really, really not coping well with gender and sexuality. And I don't know if it's their issue between their ears or a religious reaction, that they're taking this radical religious point of view where they have to speak for God. And ironically, I don't know if God likes me or what, but I had some people telling me that I'm going to hell because of, the book of Revelations and all that kind of stuff. And all of a sudden I get this Matthew 18, 2-5. Unless you come as a child and become a child, you shall not enter the kingdom of God. And I'm thinking, well, if I haven't become a child, then who the heck has? Right.
That's so interesting.
So, and I don't know where that came from. I don't read enough of the Bible to know that, but I looked up Matthew 18 and I thought, wow, that's a perfect response. And then they say I misinterpreted it. I misinterpreted it. Unless you come as a child and become a child. Like, I looked at so many different versions of the Bible. I'm thinking, no, I think you could actually put this on a T-shirt and it's self-explanatory, Right. But anyways.
That's hilarious.
Yes. No.
Speaking of funny things, though, I mean, you really are really funny. And I want to ask about the comedy. Because this is your first time doing comedy as a 6-year-old girl, but is it your first time doing comedy?
Yeah,
Yeah.
I have done some poetry, some slam poetry for fundraisers for different universities, and I have injected humor into some of my public speaking engagements just because I found people were crying. And so I sort of play this ping pong game with them where I throw something out there, and if it's getting too heavy, I lighten it up. So people who have heard me talk, have sat through lectures, they'll see that I was sort of manipulating them. I would let them get the truth and everything, and then as soon as I realized it was getting too heavy, that it might start triggering people, I'd lighten it up with some humor, and then they'd get a laugh out, and then we'd go back into the heavy stuff. And so I sort of have this back and forth playing ping pong with them, which led me to think, well, you know what? Why don't we address this on a bigger scale, and I do it on stage as a comedy routine, because there is so much that happens that, I don't even have to practice. This is improv all the way through, and it's so ridiculous that, I'm basically going to do my routine on a swear jar, because I do swear. I don't know if I've sweared yet today, but I'm hoping I didn't, because I'm trying to keep this clean. Okay. But on stage, I will swear, because I have an opinion and it's pretty strong. And the other thing is I'm going to compare farts. How my fart doesn't smell, but if you walk into a room where I've farted and you go, oh, what the heck is, you go to the bathroom, right? And you're thinking, you're reading the magazine while you're going to the bathroom, and someone else walks in the bathroom and goes, whoa, what died in here, right? So there's that perception, where you have your point of view and somebody else walks in with their point of view. So my humor is going to evolve from that we perceive ourselves a certain way, and other people look. And again, me dressing as a little girl, I perceive myself, because I don't look at myself. I see the dress. I don't look in my face. I'm standing there in front of an audience, and I'm a little girl. Whether I take my doll out there or ride out on a tricycle, whatever I choose to do, I'm going to use that action-reaction, and I'm going to present it in a way that consider the fact that I don't know my fart smells, okay? Because I'm a little naive, but then so do you. It's human nature, right? And then I'm also going to talk about dogs. Like, dogs fascinate me. They have the most sensitive smell. And what's the first thing they do when they see you? They can smell, they could smell a Skittle in a stadium, right?
That's right.
And yet when they come up to you, they're in your crotch. And I'm thinking, your nose is way too good to be in my crotch, because I know I farted already. So
Oh, that's fantastic.
that's a little bit of a insight into what I want to get into.
It's a little teaser of what's what's to come later tonight.
Yes.
That's interesting though, because do you find that comedy too? It's like part of maybe like a therapeutic sort of thing for you, because there's always that connection made with people that have anxiety or depression, that comedy is a very good outlet to.
But it's a dangerous one. It's a mask, and I respect a lot of comedians because I know they're coming from a place of pain, and it's easy to make people laugh when you're hurt. And when Robin Williams killed himself, I took that personal. Mm-hmm. I thought, if he still hasn't got it under control and he chose to leave rather than keep laughing, it scares me. I'm hoping the laughing works. I'm hoping it destigmatizes a 52-year-old guy in a dress, makes the world better for your kids, but at the same time, it's going to put me out there as a target for a lot of abuse and ridicule, and you become a spokesperson, and really none of us are spokespeople. We may appear that way to other people. It's just my opinion, right? At the end of the day, there's 7 billion people running around the planet. We all have an opinion. Mine just happens to get a spotlight as of the middle of December, when people decided to pounce on that interview. And so I'm at the point now is, if the spotlight's on me, what good can I do with it? Because something has to happen. Something has to change. Mm-hmm. And again, with Robin Williams passing away, I know I'm never going to fill his shoes. And so if he couldn't handle it, I'm hoping that I can handle it, because it is a mask. And I really don't want, I'm very open about myself, and I don't want to hide behind anything, but, tears of the clown, right? And it's scary, because at the end of the day, you can laugh about it on stage, and at night you still have to lay down on your pillow and reconcile with yourself. Mm-hmm. Was it worth it?
Mm-hmm. It's very true.
Yeah, so it's
a dark place.
Yeah.
Comedy.
Yes. Certainly. Stefoknee, I want to ask you how you feel about your place right now within the transgender community. I was just reading some stuff online, and it seems that there is a bit of a division as to whether your presentation is a fetish or not.
Yeah, that's a very good question. It's a complicated question.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to answer it, I think, three different ways. One am I a fetish? Yes, to some people it is a fetish, and me wearing this dress turns them on, and so yeah, it's fetishized. Am I part of the trans community? Definitely. I identify as genderqueer. I am on the feminine side, so I use female pronouns, whether it's Paul or Stefoknee, which is still part of the trans umbrella. And then the final answer I want to give you is when people are oppressed and you're taking hormones and you're taking different medications, sometimes you lash out at the people that are closest to you, whether we've met each other or not. Just the fact that we are trans, I get attacked by trans people. And I'm fine with it most of the time. If they start including my kids, I will lash back at them because enough is enough. I have spoken to a lot of people in the community. I'm an activist. I've been an activist for years. And the people that know me know I'm an activist, know I'm part of the trans community. You check the history, like go look at trans history in Ontario and Canada. My name shows up long before someone knew who I was. But the bottom line is someone somewhere in the world will say something about high profile trans people, which I've now obviously become, not of my own doing. I don't understand. The police said I'm a celebrity, and I say I'm the most famous person no one's ever heard of. And so you become a spokesperson, and you have two choices. The police said, just ignore it. Just don't go on social media for a while and let it die down and walk away. But we've been trying for decades to get a voice. And here I have people listening. How do I turn it off? Like I have a responsibility to draw awareness to what's going on. And unfortunately, some people, whether it's their medication or it's their situation, they lash out at me. And I kind of understand it. I've seen it from my own friends. I've lost friends because of medication. They do not respond well to my activism. And I'm not going to stop my activism just because it embarrasses them. Mm-hmm. Because no one's ever died of embarrassment, even though they say you died of embarrassment. But I can tell you, for young kids, suicide is very real. And unless we destigmatize this, there will be more suicides, and they're always for the same reason.
I have to ask Stefoknee about your support group. I know there was one that was started for you by a minister. Am I correct?
Deacon from my church. Yeah.
Okay.
Linda Leaders.
How did that come to pass, and how has that been for you having that group?
Okay, what happened was Linda and I became very good friends as part of MCC Toronto, and she really embraced what I was going through and tried to shield me from some of the pain. And in the process, she went through some hardships herself in her personal life, and so we started being each other's support. And at one point, I was very suicidal, and I gave her my spreadsheet with all my contacts from my previous life. And I basically told her, phone anybody there's like 250 names on it. It was our Christmas card list, basically, right? So all their names, phone numbers, addresses were on there. And I said, phone anybody and talk about anything you want about me, because I think I'm going to be gone soon. I had set Christmas as my date to go. And so she started phoning people, and she started talking to them as a friend that knew Stefoknee, and she was phoning people that were friends with Paul. And then it evolved into her phoning me and saying, oh, I just spoke to so-and-so, and they're really nice. I said, I told you these are nice people. I said, phone anyone. They're all really nice people. And a lot of them would cry and say, we didn't realize, 4 years had passed or 5 years had passed. And they felt bad that they had lost contact with me. So she started inviting people to her house and saying, if I invite Stefoknee here, will you come down and talk to Stefoknee or Paul? And then we'll sort of have these round table discussions. And we did that. And it turned out to be amazing. And then more people stepped forward because they would talk to their friends or my friends, right? And they would open that up again. And we would just continue the dialogue, and the group got bigger. But then at a certain point, this was in the summer, the World Pride, the summer of World Pride, I think that was 2014. June 28th, I had become disenchanted with Pride Toronto's promise on that Friday of the opening of World Pride, Kevin had said that we need to listen to the trans community. And so Linda had called me and said, did you hear what... No, actually, she didn't call me. She was there with me. And she said, did you just hear what he said? And I said, I'll believe it when I see it. And then she called me and said, you need to go. And I've called him. And he said, she complimented him for saying that. And I said, I've already booked an appointment. I'm going in to see him. And they didn't listen. Like, they wanted to have a celebration for World Pride. And I said, the trans community isn't ready to celebrate yet. We have lost sisters and brothers that have died. And the world needs to know, we want to have a memorial. We want to remember those people that have died in the struggle for human rights. And to say you want to go down to Dundas Square and dance in the middle of the city and celebrate what? We don't have, we're not included in the Canadian Charter of Rights. Toby's Law hasn't been tested yet. And in fact, that's what I'm testing now with Newmarket, is to see if I even have human rights within Ontario. And I don't believe I do. I spent 9 days in solitary confinement on a rumor. The York Regional Police arrested me and kept me in jail, for 9 whole days, and nobody cared. And there's not, that was last March, that's almost a year's gone by. And they put a media ban on it, so we can't talk about it, so I can't mention names. But, at the end of the day, I don't care about a media ban. What's the worst thing you can do, is arrest me again and throw me? You've already done that so many times. It doesn't scare me anymore. I know when I'm in there, I'm in good company. When I'm locked up, I think of people like Nelson Mandela, who spent a lot longer in prison than I did. And there's a lot of people that have not only been arrested that were innocent, they've been put to death, in the name of justice or in the name of a legal system. And so I'm in good company. Actually, a student at U of T asked me if I would try to clear my name. And I said, no, I'm in really good company. I'm not ashamed of what I've been accused of. And if I felt like I'd done, and I've done things wrong, I'm not saying I haven't, but I don't think I've done anything that deserves putting me in jail for 1 hour, let alone for weeks. And they continue with this farce of a legal system, labeling me as something I'm not, just to get restraining orders to keep me out of York Region so that they don't have to be embarrassed. Well, that's not what the legal system's for. You bring forward somebody you show me a crime scene or a 911 call or something tangible that is evidence of this happening, they don't have it. Legal Aid has constantly said to me, there's no evidence here. There's nothing to go on. There won't be a trial, but there is a trial, and they do convict me because I don't have a lawyer, And so I'm baffled at how a country like Canada can do this. And yet I look around the world, at least my head's still on my shoulders. Like, they take people and they annihilate them. When I hear of the atrocities that happen to LGBTQ people, I'm lucky. At least I'm just in a cell. I'm still alive. There are a lot of people who don't even get a trial and don't get, a punishment that's reversible. Once they shoot you or lob your head off, it's over. You're done. And that's the part where I think, just accept what they're doing to you and be thankful it's not as bad as what could be, and that's where the death threats actually did scare me, because some of the things they were suggesting were equivalent to what they do to people, so I said actually afterwards, I'd inquired into what a casket costs for someone who's 6'2", and they said, well, you pay a $1,500 premium if you're 6'2". So when people threatened to cut my head off, I said, well, at least I'll save $1,500 on a casket. But we as a society got to stop judging. I don't care where you come from, what religion or what background, it's wrong. It's the ego trying to justify your way of living at the cost of somebody else. We need to stop judging. Accept people. We're diverse. Everybody's different. We aren't binary. Snowflakes aren't binary. Everything on the planet is unique. Allow each other to be unique. And whether you're left-handed or right-handed doesn't make you a witch. And whether you are this religion or that religion doesn't make you closer to God. And whether you're gay, straight, trans, or cis doesn't make you better than the other. It's just, their options, their diversity. I hope we embrace people, especially young people. Like, let them grow up in a world that when they tell us who they are and they tell us what they like, that we embrace it and say, great, thank you for labeling yourself, because we don't need to label you now. And I think that's, I tweeted this about a week ago, and I tweeted, "Stigma is the glue that makes labels stick," and we got to destigmatize.
That was a fantastic interview. I think it's really interesting that I feel almost the exact same way I felt after the interview with Little Bear,
Right.
with Stefoknee, because it's again about embracing who you are without caring about the rest of the world's perceptions, which I think no matter what it is that you look like or how you go about presenting that, I mean, there's something really commendable about that. Of course, if you do it in a peaceful manner, which it seems like Stefoknee is definitely doing.
Yeah, I think individuals like Stefoknee are really interesting because they're kind of a barometer as to how far we have yet to go as a society to be all embracing and respectful of diversity. Because we hear it all the time that we are there, that we're a multicultural society that is tolerant and recognizes everyone for who they are. But when you hear the stories of people like Stefoknee or people who are marginalized or stigmatized, it's kind of a reminder or a wake-up call that, perhaps in practice or in reality, there's quite a bit that we have to do. There's still a lot of work to be done before we can get to who we think we are or who we believe we are.
Yeah, exactly, who we claim we are.
Yes. Yeah.
It's fascinating. So we definitely want to hear feedback from our listeners and viewers, of course. You're going to want to strap yourself in for next week's podcast. We're sitting down with horrorcore hip-hop artist Trash Gordon, who has done projects with Mad Child from Swollen Members. His latest single has just been featured on Rue Morgue, the horror magazine's website, and he's going to talk to us about his creative process and what pisses him off. Until then.
This is The Dark Room.